Good day and welcome to Computer Repairs with Rob. Today's issue is a computer. It's a tower computer, and the issue with it is it's crashing. It crashes when you load Windows. It crashes after you get Windows loaded. It may crash after you load a program or two or three. But in any case, it just will crash, shut down, and it may not even be able to get to the login screen before it crashes. And this has been going on for quite a while, according to the customer. So what I did is first test the hard drive. This computer, in fact, had 3 drives, one solid-state drive, one 2.5-inch standard drive, and one 3.5-inch standard drive. So it had 3 drives and one optical drive. It had a wireless card and it had a video card. The video card was only about a 2 gig, and it didn't require any auxiliary power. It just ran from the PCI Express slot. So first I tested the hard drives typically I like to test with Seagate. I find it pretty good. It's not 100% accurate. It will test the drive. It can't test the speed of the drive particularly. But in any case, all of these drives passed Seagate. Then I said, well, maybe the RAM is the culprit. So I tried testing RAM. I used memtest for that normally, and that passed. So then I tried running the computer with one device at a time. So for example, one hard drive, and I would disconnect the other drives and disconnect the wireless card, for example, and disconnect the, the optical drive. And at times it seemed to work, but then randomly it would just crash again, and it didn't seem to make any difference. So I thought, well, let me try my power supply. Maybe the power supply is an issue. I have a test power supply that I like to use. So I tried it, and lo and behold, it did the same thing with my test power supply. So I began scratching my head, not really sure what was going on. So I thought, well, I have a tester. I have a power supply tester, which I don't use that often. I thought, let me just check out of curiosity what the voltages are on these power supplies. So I tested my test power supply, and it actually was not testing at the proper voltage. When I tested his power supply that came with the computer, again, it was the same as mine. It was lacking in one of the voltages. When I used it on a known good power supply, one off the shelf, all the voltages were up to where they should be, and I'll explain that later. So in the end, I ended up changing power supply. I put in a known good power supply, new off the shelf. It happened to be about I think it was 1,000 watt actually. He wanted to go big. But I had a 700 that was working fine as well. But it just turned out that the power supply that he had with all those devices was just not enough to power it. And even, in fact, occasionally with just 1 or 2 devices, it would still crash. So let me show you how I tested that and what this tester looks like. And I want to test it on a couple of different power supplies. So let's check that out. I'll be with you in a minute. Okay, so here's the power supply tester, which you can get online for anywhere from probably $12 to $20. It has this 24-pin motherboard connector here, the 4 or 8-pin connector here, and the PCI Express connector here. All right, so it also has some dummy lights here for some of the rail plugs. It has a Molex connector and also SATA connector. So let's plug it in and see what happens. Here's our 24 pin that will connect up. And then here is the 8 pin. And PCI Express, go in there. Now we have to do is plug it in and turn that switch on. You can see now that now it's lit up and the levels are showing. Now that happens as soon as you plug this in, turn it on. So what we've got here, there's voltages, and we've got 3, 5, or 12 volt, depending on which rail it is. They should all be at least the 3 to 5 or 12 volts. In fact, typically they're slightly over, maybe 2 to 3 points over. If they're under at all, then chances are that power supply is defective and won't be able to, to manage all the devices that are plugged in. So let's look and see what these numbers are. We've got here 5.2 volt, that's good. 12.3 is good. 3.3 there is good. That 12 is potentially low. Now the other day when I tested this, the exact same power supply was showing 11.9. And when I used that on this computer that was crashing, lo and behold, this one also caused it to crash. So the 11.9 volts was not enough to power up all the devices that computer had. We see here that 12.3 is good, and that 5.2 is good. This PG, milliseconds, so power supply good or power good. So that should be between 100 and 500 milliseconds, and we see that it's 330. So that is good as well. We can plug in the Molex or the SATA connector. So let's try that right now. Here's a SATA one. We'll plug that in, and you'll see that these idiot lights show up, and they just show all the voltages are good. Again, you can also try the Molex on the other side, and it's good to do these one at a time. You can test them all individually to see if perhaps maybe one connection is bad. But I'm just going to show you one here. And again, on this one, you've got the 5 and the 12 volts. It doesn't have the 3 volts. So there's those idiot lights are on there now. Okay, so I want to also test a known defective power supply, and to show you what the reading is on that. So let's do that, and I'll be back in a moment. All right, so I have here a known defective power supply. This one is Antec. It happens to be 550 watt. And so I've got it plugged in. I've got these plugs all in. So let's plug in the power supply itself, turn it on, and see what readings we get on this one. All right, so what we see here is 5.1 and 12.1, and 12.1 and 5.1 down here, and they're a little bit lower than normal. Typically, as I said, you're going to see, in the 0.2, 0.3 range. What's noticeable though is this 11.9 here in this corner, and that one is definitely low. And if there's any kind of load on this computer, it's not going to run. It's going to crash. And in fact, that's the problem with this one. It was crashing. Quite often it wouldn't even start up. You would turn on, the fan would run, but there would be no signal. It wasn't strong enough to put a signal to the video, to the screen. And so we replaced it. But this tool, it's a handy tool if you're having trouble trying to diagnose the problem with the power supply. So again, if you're trying to diagnose a problem with a computer, and you've tested the hard drive, tested the RAM, then test the power supply. If you have this device, you can hook it up, see what the voltages are, and that will, just gives you a further evidence of what the culprit is. In this case, the power supply. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it helps you. Have a great day.